This is another episode of Standup Comedy, your host and MC, celebrating 40-plus years on the fringe of show business. Stories, interviews, and comedy sets from the famous and not so famous. Here's your host and MC, Scott Edwards.
Ladies and gentlemen, welcome back to the podcast. Man, I am so excited. We have another comedy roundtable, and this time we're going to be talking about the variety arts, and I'm so lucky to have two of the best in the business. I've had a chance to work with both of these gentlemen for many years. They are extremely talented in all the variety arts, but we're going to get into detail as we chat. First, out of the San Francisco Bay Area, he is known as the Blind Juggler. He has been performing on Pier 39 for decades, is done many specialty shows for me. Why? Because he's a very talented comic and juggler, does a little magic, and mixes it all together to a very entertaining show. And then also joining us, and that's Fred Anderson. Fred.
Hey.
Good to have you with us. Short applause. And then also joining us out of Los Angeles, his home, is one of the most famous comic magician ventriloquist. You've seen him on Facebook and Twitter and TikTok. He is known as the Split Man on social media. But his main career is he four-walls shows around the country. And he is not only a terrific stand-up comic and a magician, but also a really good ventriloquist. Ladies and gentlemen, Andy Gross. And so that was short applause for both of you. Say hi.
Perfect. Hi. Hey, although Scott, we should amend my title. I'm older now, so I'm now the bifocal juggler.
Oh, there you go. A little bit extra. And let's give both Andy Gross and Fred Anderson the proper applause they deserve. There you go, ladies and gentlemen. The crowd goes nuts. All right, settle down. All right, so Andy and Fred are both variety acts. They do ventriloquism and juggling and all these different things. And what I wanted to kind of talk about today on the podcast is I know that you both started in the variety acts and then added comedy. Is that correct? Andy, you go first.
Yeah, absolutely. I did. Yeah. I mean, I remember when I first started doing some open mics, I would go there and I was more of a magician since I was a kid. So I'd do a couple magic tricks and these guys would be like, hey, that's really cool, but this is a comedy club. So can you make it a little funny somehow? So I had to start working on comedy if I wanted to work at these comedy clubs. And that was the only place you really could work back then.
Right. And then Fred, I know you've been juggling your whole life, and you did that before you became a comic, right?
Yeah, it was similar to what you've seen other people do, where rather than the bookers telling me you need to be funny, it was the audience. So I started out. I started out doing shows at the Renaissance Festival, and you the juggling is a physical skill. You work on something forever, and you go, you should look at this because it's really hard. And people go, we don't care.
Right.
So you had to add the comedy into it. Otherwise,
that's a good point. Yeah, that's true. I mean, that's right, because you could do a really technically hard sleight of hand movement, and nobody gives a darn. They just say, "Well, big deal." They want to be entertained. They want it to be funny or really wow them. They don't care how hard or how much practice you put into this thing. You're right.
It's even harder with the magician, because if you do a really good technical sleight of hand move, they don't even know it happened.
Right.
So they don't even know they're supposed to be impressed.
Mm-hmm.
Well, it's both. You both made the point that you could practice, whether it's juggling or magic, a particular move or bit, but you still need to make it relatable to the audience, and that you then had to develop your talents as stand-up comics. Now, I've seen you both perform, and you both have moments in your acts where you're kind of just being a comic, but you always were rooted in the variety acts. I think connecting to the audience is really the key, right?
I agree.
100%.
Yep.
Yes. Yeah. It's really weird because, if you have to really connect with it. Exactly. Entertain. It's got to be funny. I found that really early on. Good magic trick is great, but they really want to, especially at these comedy clubs, they want to laugh.
Right. And then for a juggler, you're using the comedy to kind of emphasize what's happening with your hands. I mean, I've seen a lot of jugglers. I've been very blessed to work with some of the best, including Fred. And I've seen you perform on Pier 39. You're amazing. But it's the interaction and the communicating, what everybody in the industry, whether it's magic or juggling, call the patter. It's the communication, the discussion with the audience that highlights the juggling, right, Fred?
Yeah. So you go into either, the why you should be impressed with this. Either it's dangerous or it's ridiculous, but you explain to them and interact with the audience on, how they should be perceived. It's like you create your own reality. Look, I'm juggling knives. Okay. They're like knives with the sharp edges rubbed off, with sandpaper, but don't think about that. Think about how dangerous it would be if they were really real knives. And you do jokes about that.
Well, then also that brings up the point in because I know it's true in magic that you use the patter for misdirection, but I didn't realize it actually is kind of true for juggling as well, right?
Oh, God, yes. Absolutely.
And Andy, in magic, isn't the patter all about distraction?
90% of it. Absolutely. Absolutely. You're telling them one thing and you're doing something else. You're in essence, you're a liar and cheat.
Well, welcome to show business.
We are so cynical. Actually, I disagree with Andy on it slightly, because with the magic, yes, you're distracting people from, the move or whatever the heck you're doing, but you're also telling a story, and you're using the visual part of the magic to illustrate the story. So that helps. So, let's see. So there's that thing you do, Andy, where you have, the gypsy thread?
Yes. Right.
Yeah. Where you have a long piece of thread, and you talk about how, people are connected by these various things. And like, if you break the connection. But didn't you say, with love, you can like meld it all back together?
That's exactly right. Yeah. And then and then the string restores itself. Right. So you are telling a story. You are right. You're right. But sometimes you might show an empty bag, and you don't always have to show that bag empty. People just assume it's empty. There's a lot of different ways you can do things, So you are kind of using a little bit of misdirection,
But you're controlling,
with the patter.
But I think both in juggling and in magic, and Fred, you do magic as well, you're using the patter, you're using that interaction with the audience to entertain and distract, right?
Yes, I agree.
Yeah.
And so now comes the interesting part. Now we have to make it funny. So I'll start with you, Fred. How difficult was it adding humor to all the juggling and magical talents you had practiced?
It was sort of different at the beginning. Then it became a little it's sort of different, but also more different as you go along. So if you just talk about the actual stunts, you do jokes about the stunts. So like if you're juggling knives, it's dangerous. If you're juggling fire, it could be dangerous for the front row, especially. Then once you get past all the jokes you can do about that, then it becomes interacting with the audience. And then it gets a little bit more difficult. And that comes with experience. And then you get more experience that, chatting with the people and interacting with the audience. I have not yet figured out how to effectively blend like stand-up comedy about your life in the world with juggling stunts.
Look, juggling your checkbook and your mortgage and your bills, or juggling your wife and your girlfriend.
Yeah. I've tried jokes like that, and the audience just goes, "God, the whole audience says, wow, that is really hacky."
Well, Andy, now you doing magic and what you do as a comic, you were already performing magic since you were a kid. Was it difficult adding the humorous, the jokes, to the patter?
Well, I was forced into it, like I said, because when I started doing these open mics, they were at comedy clubs. So again, they would say, you're a really good magician, but we would like to see some comedy here because it's a comedy club. So I kind of was forced into this. And you know what a lot of guys do early on is you take a few standard stock lines and you start putting them in your act. And maybe, some other guys might do them. They're kind of old stock lines that have been around forever. So you're getting laughs or getting some confidence. And then with me, I just started building upon those. And a lot of material, I'm telling you, I would write almost on stage. You'd say something and go, hey, that's pretty funny. I would record all my shows. Back then it was just a little, a voice recording thing. But I would record them all and listen back. And if, got a little chuckle, no matter what I said, I would always write that down and continue to, and then I'd use that line. I mean, I remember one time I did a bit, might have been at your place, Scott, that I had a dummy. And the dummy used to do a mind reading bit. He would sit on a bench and I'd cover his head with something, put a blindfold on or something. And he fell off the bench. And he wasn't supposed to, but he fell off the bench. Well, when I picked him up, he just started yelling at me and saying how stupid I was. So I said, this is great. How am I going to keep this bit in? So that developed into a whole thing where the dummy would fall off the bench during a mind reading thing. And eventually he broke. I had to keep repairing it. I go, but who cares? It's funny.
Yeah.
So a lot of stuff kind of happens and creates on stage. It really does.
Well, it's interesting that you go ahead, Fred.
And if you're lucky, those sorts of situations, if you're lucky, sometimes the audience writes stuff for you. So something weird happens and somebody from the audience will yell out something that'll be really interesting or funny or like takes your patter in a direction that you hadn't planned on.
Well, that's true. Yeah, that's 100% true. Yeah, I've had a few bits like that. Yeah. There was a guy that. Go ahead. I'm sorry, Fred. And the tragic thing is like, because I don't tape all of my shows like you do, I go, God, that's funny. I got to remember that. And then, oh shit, I forgot. You got to write it down. Yeah.
Well, rule number.
I had a real thing that happened. A thing that happened to me that I used. After a show on. Go ahead, Sean.
No, I want to hear it, Andy, but I want to make sure that the audience knows if there's any potential comics. We've been mentioned many times. Rule number 1, record your shows. Good job. So, Andy, what's the story?
I do. Well, this is a true story, and I don't know if it's an old joke or not, but I still use it to this day. I hadn't heard the joke. So after a show, a guy came up to me, and I use this in my routine still. And there's an older guy who comes up to me right after the show, and there's a bit where I make a card rise out of this big pad of paper. And he said to me, he was with his wife, and he walks over to me and he goes, hey, how did you make that card rise out of the paper? And it was right after the show. So, I was just messing with him. And I said, sir, I could tell you, but I'd have to kill you. And he looks at me without missing a beat. He goes, tell my wife. And I go, that's a great joke. I still tell that joke. And I don't know if it was an old joke or what, but he was fast enough to do it. And I go, that's really funny.
Yeah,
so
that's good. Well, yeah. I think that Fred touched on something that I know Andy agreed with, and that is that any of us in entertainment are always trying to engage with an audience. The audience is always changing, so you never know where it's going to go. So you have to be kind of fluid and be able to pivot to things. But I think it's really interesting that a lot of the material, the comedy aspect, because you've already trained and practiced the tricks or the juggling bit, but can come from the audience or that interaction with the audience, which is so important. Now, on top of being a magician and Fred being a magician and a juggler, we want to mention that Andy Gross is a terrific world-class ventriloquist and has several characters that have been featured on TV and on YouTube videos. Andy, was it different? Now, when you're a ventriloquist, you're really performing in 2 characters in your own mind, using voices to differentiate.
Right.
Did that, doing comedy in that regard, I imagine that would be easier.
A little bit. It's a little bit. The hard part for me sometimes with that is I don't like to get it too much of the shut up and punch. It sounds too much like an old joke you're doing a lot of times. So you try to tell more stories. That is a harder part for me to do. I like to kind of tell these stories with the dummy. So it's not just, but bump. I say a thing and then he just does the laugh, the little punchline. So it has been a little bit of a challenge. I know for a lot of ventriloquists talk about that too, because it's so easy just to do a little silly joke with the puppet. You know, you set him up and he does the punchline. So I tried to, and I know who was great at that was like Edgar Bergen and Charlie McCarthy. They were great. If you listen to his old routines, a lot of them still hold up today. And those are from the 30s because he would tell these stories that Charlie McCarthy would always get into trouble or get into these problems. And they weren't just a joke, you know, set up and punchline, set up and punch. So that's what I try to work on with the puppets and develop a character.
And I don't know if it's been done, and it just seems to me from the outside, have you ever had the ventriloquial figure do a setup and you do the punchline? Does it go back and forth?
Yeah, I try to do that a little bit too sometimes. Yeah, I try to do that. And it's fun when you can make that work. But you know, throughout time, most of the time, it's the dummy that usually gets the laugh. You know, even modern day guys like Duff Dunham. But you're right. Sometimes if you can get the laugh, it's great. If I could do the punchline, yeah.
I would think to mix it up, that would be good. Well, let me ask Fred. I want
to say one more thing about the ventriloquist stuff.
Sure.
The cool thing about ventriloquism is you can create this fantasy world, and you invite the audience into it, and it's extraordinary because. You know, when you're on stage with a puppet, I mean, it's like a puppet. It's not real. But if you treat the puppet like it's a person or a character, the audience buys into it.
Absolutely, yeah. That's a good point. Yeah. Do
you remember a fellow named Dave Strassman?
Oh God, yeah.
Yeah, he would do a thing where he would get into an argument with his puppet, and he would lose his temper and walk off the stage. And about 30 seconds later, he had like an animatronic thing. The puppet would start to move and start to talk to the audience.
It was a great bit. Yeah, the puppet would say, "Is he gone?" Yeah.
Yeah. And this was before, you know, that kind of thing was, you know, like you could get toys that would do that. So basically, when the puppet moved, the entire audience, like basically everybody's hair just went and stood up on their heads. The whole audience just went, "What the hell is happening here?"
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, that was a great bit he did many times at my club. But you bring up a good point. Dave and I are friends. I've interviewed him a few times on the show, and you're talking about creating a fantasy world. You know, he does ventriloquial figures that are aliens, and wasn't there Andy, a famous ventriloquist that just had like a stick with a head on it? I mean, you can get away with almost
Senior
anything.
Winston. Senior Winston. He did, you know, the head in the box. It's okay. It's all right.
Yeah, and that's what I meant.
That was just one head in the box. You were right. I knew who you meant. Yeah, him. And there was also a magician named Jay Marshall that had just a little sock puppet with ears, and it became a rabbit. And it was on his left hand. He called it Lefty. Jay Marshall and Lefty. And he was on Sullivan and all those shows too. And it was brilliant. You thought this guy's hand came to life. And Senior Winston did the thing with his hand and the thumb too. He would paint it and dress it right in front of you, and his hand would become a puppet, and then you would swear the thing was alive. Even knowing what's going on, I fall for this illusion. So strong.
I think it's a good point that Fred made, that with ventriloquism, and it could be stretched a little bit with magic and juggling, but with ventriloquism, you really are creating this. You're creating this third character that creates this fantasy moment that everybody buys into. You know, there was a famous story recently shared on my podcast where it was Larry Wilson was sharing it, where they had a ventriloquist on TV and they kept saying, we're not miking the ventriloquial figure well enough. The dummy doesn't have a good enough mic. Because even the crew on the TV set thought that that was coming from the ventriloquial figure as opposed to the ventriloquist. They wanted to mic him and maybe give him a lapel mic. I mean, it was just crazy how people will buy into it. What I was going to get to, a little bit away from ventriloquism, but it ties in. When it comes to stand-up comedy and then mixing in the variety arts, I'll start with Fred. What comes first, the juggling bit, and then the humor, or the humor and then you try to find a juggling bit that fits it?
In the early part of your career, the juggling stunt comes first. Then you go, okay, I learned this stunt. What can I say about it? Then, once you kind of have an established show, you go, oh, wow, this is a funny idea. Okay, great. Now I have to learn how to juggle chainsaws blindfolded on a tightrope, because I got some great jokes about that.
Right.
That's right.
So
Yeah.
it developed with experience.
Yeah. For instance, I used to walk tightrope. I stopped doing it about, 10 years ago. Well, actually 15 years ago now, because of arthritis, and I got my hips replaced. Now I can do it again. I can talk about, hey, I'm 66, and doing the tightrope is it's not as impressive as it used to be, because I'm 66. People aren't impressed; they're just worried.
That was put perfectly. Thank you, Fred. Andy, when you're working on a ventriloquial bit or a magic bit, are you creating the bit first and then adding the humor, or can you come up with a humorous concept like Fred mentioned and then create a trick or do a ventriloquial piece around it?
I think it's the bit for me usually comes first. Because there's only, a lot of magicians, this is kind of interesting to do. A lot of magicians do a lot of the same tricks. But what's really cool is they present it different. Every guy has a different presentation or a different spin or a different twist on that trick, and it becomes their own. So it's all about the presentation to me. Again, there's only a few ways to palm cards and do sleight of hand stuff, but it's how you present it and how the audience, is going to like it. Some guys play it serious, some guys do comedy. I always like the comedy part. I develop a bit, then I add the comedy.
Is it similar in ventriloquism? Obviously, you don't come up with the character and then try to write to it. You write some material and you think, okay, which character is going to fit this? How, is it different that way?
No, I think it's backwards for me on that one. See, I'm always trying to come up with a character, because if you can create the character, then it's much easier to write. That's why I was trying to get away from because a lot of people can take any dummy and you can put any, old joke in there and set up and punch. But if you have a great character, then you can start writing stories about this character's life, his life and just different things, all about his whole life. So I think that's the most important part. Like Jeff Dunham is a master, I think, at that too. He's got these characters, exactly what they are when he brings them out. And he's telling more stories. I mean, he has some jokes and jokey jokes in there, but for the most part, he is telling a lot of stories, and these characters just come to life.
Well,
that's a good point. I mean, if you had a ventriloquist character that was a vampire, you could, what would a vampire say about suntan lotion?
Right, exactly. You got to get I think the character first.
Yeah, what would a vampire? Vampire would complain that hey, I get a bad reputation. Or
you get a pirate character, any kind of character you get, and all of a sudden you can have a million different things, stories, and situations you can put them in.
Well, I think it's fun for me to hear two masters of the variety arts talking about how what they've learned from stand-up comedy has really offered not only an extension of the material, but an increasing quality of the material that they're presenting to an audience. Because, watching a good juggler is amazing, but a good juggler that can bring the audience in with a story and some jokes is extra special. Or as we mentioned earlier, you can watch magic, and like you said, some do it straight, some do it with humor. But even with the ventriloquism, which I think always has to be humorous, it really is the story. It's the engagement with the audience. It goes back to the basics of entertainment, that you have to talk about something the audience can relate to, find the humor in it, find the funny, as we say. And in all the variety arts, it really comes down to the patter. Fred, you've been doing this many decades. Do you find it easier these days to write the humor, or has it always come naturally?
It's a little easier because you learn like the various patterns and formulas to use. That's a little easier. Also, from being in comedy clubs, just by osmosis, you learn that skill of having a conversation with the audience rather than just, here's my thing, here's my script, I'm going to, present it. You're in a TV studio or something.
Right.
And,
that's very true. Yeah.
Yeah. And watching people in comedy clubs that are good at that sort of, chatting up with the audience. The people that are good, they have their prepared material. And then there's the, random chatting with the, that guy in the third row with a funny hat. And they'll transition from riffing with the guy in the third row into a prepared piece of material. And the people that are good, you won't know where they change. You won't know where they make the transition into a prepared piece. And it's breathtaking watching people do that.
Well, that was fun watching you, Fred. Well, I was saying when Fred and I, we used to tour around a lot together, and we would play some big venues, and Fred was great at that, like exactly what he just said. He would, we'd play a venue, there might be 600-700 people there, and it was like everyone became his friend. It almost seemed like everybody knew Fred at the end of that show, every person in the audience, because he would just connect so well with the audience. And you're right, Fred, I couldn't tell sometimes even when it was something you had already done, or if you're just ad-libbing or what. It was pretty neat. And you were great at that. It really was.
Well, and I think Fred's point was, in you're validating it, Andy, is that there is I hate to use the term because we're talking to two magicians, but there's some magic to when the conversation and the entertainment are interchangeable and become spliced into one moment. And that once that moment passes, it's gone. But that's the interesting thing about live stage acting and the entertainment field that we're in, is that Fred was saying how great it feels to have those moments, those magical moments, but you have to notice and appreciate them, because when they're gone, they're gone.
That's right.
Yeah.
Right.
Pretty wild stuff.
Yeah.
Well, before we go, Andy, I know that as a ventriloquist, you always have one of your ventriloquial figures nearby. Is anybody nearby?
I don't have that many of them right now where I am, believe it or not, which is weird, because usually I'm down in my office, which I'm surrounded by about 100 of them. Because, I collect the old ones. I don't use them all, but I collect them. So,
well, I just thought maybe one of your friends could share. Wait.
There you go. I hear one now. One guy's screaming to get out of somewhere.
Andy, why are you being so mean to that puppet?
I got him locked in the case. He wasn't that funny last show, so he stays in the case.
Well, if you could let him out of the case, I have a question for him.
Okay, go ahead.
So who am I talking to?
Okay, I'm going to get Minikin. Minikin is one that I use from time to time. Okay, hold on.
If Minikin's got a minute, I got to Fred, I hope you don't mind. I wanted to get a third opinion.
Oh, here. I'm here. What is it?
Oh, Minikin. So thanks for joining us. I appreciate you taking a couple minutes. I know that you and Andy work closely together. How important is the comedy or the jokes to you being having a chance on stage?
Repeat the question. No, come on. Come on, seriously. Answer them. Go ahead. What was the question again, Scott? Because I don't think you heard it good.
All right. When you're working with Andy on stage, Minikin, what is the jokes, is the humor, does it come naturally, or do you have to work at it?
See what I just did there, Scott? So you repeated the question for the dummy like he didn't really hear it. I heard it.
Well, I know, but I want to hear what Heath has to say.
Easy. The comedy comes pretty natural for me. For him, not so much. I carry him most of the time. You know what I mean?
Yeah,
he does. He does do most of these. Yes.
Well, we were talking about he gets most of the best lines, but Minikin, you ever thought of letting Andy get the good joke in?
No, nothing, never. And you know what? He keeps all the money. He doesn't pay me a darn dime. Nothing. I get nothing. Nothing.
Well, I guess that is the nature of show business. Well, thanks for coming out of your box and sharing a moment with us.
Whatever. He's very nasty. He's nasty.
Yeah, well,
He's not
that's
a friendly one.
Andy, you got to be careful. Your dummies are gonna unionize.
You know what I used to think too? I was going to mention before was Willie Tyler and Lester, which I know he's probably your club a lot too. He did a neat thing. He used to put a microphone in front of the dummy. Do you remember that?
oh
He would
yeah.
always he'd have a microphone for himself, and then he'd put another microphone in front of the dummy. I mean, it wasn't plugged in, obviously, but he would put it there, and the illusion was really strong. And not many ventriloquists other than him that really does that, but I thought that was always pretty neat because it does help sell the illusion.
And what Fred was saying is the illusion is all part of the entertainment and the fantasy that makes it all work. Well, I got to tell you, this has been a fun roundtable to do. Fred is a juggler performing regularly on Pier 39. Is there any other?
And points around the world. I'm going to go back to the Edinburgh Festival this year.
Oh, wow.
Oh,
Great.
that'll be awesome.
Yeah. Yeah, I'm looking forward to that.
So anybody that's going to be in Scotland could see you.
Yep. On the Royal Mile in Edinburgh.
Thank you for sharing some of your talents and information and real experience as a very talented juggler and magician. And you have Edinburgh coming up. You're regularly on Pier 39. I hope you continue doing magic and juggling for many, many years. Thanks for joining us on the show. Andy, you are four-walling shows, and we should explain to the audience, because it's a show business term, when you're four-walling a show, you're acting as your own producer. So you put up the money to rent a theater, and then you put together the show, you sell the tickets, and hopefully you make money, but it's more of a gamble. You're like a high-risk entrepreneur entertainer, right?
You're right. Yeah, and you pray that people show. Yeah, but I think it's a little bit easier today than ever because with the internet, like you were saying, I have these viral videos, and once people start to know you, it's changed. It's a game changer. People do show up, which is nice. So you don't have to wait to be on Carson anymore. You don't have to wait to have your own TV show. You can get out there on the internet and do this stuff, and all of a sudden you have a little cult following, and they're coming out to see the shows, and we're putting on the best show I can, and thankfully we're getting audiences out there. That's what it's all about.
Well, I think it's really brave and smart of you to do this because when you are four-walling your own show, that means you actually get to keep the profits instead of split them or just get paid.
Sure.
But when it comes to social media, you're like a god. You have many really good videos on TikTok and Instagram. Split Man comes to mind, the headless girlfriend. Mm-hmm. You have a few million followers?
Yeah, I mean, we just crossed the threshold. It was pretty crazy. We went over 1 billion views, 1 billion. And I thought, when I was scratching my head going, how can this even be 1 billion views? You know, that's like the Rolling Stones would have 1 billion views or something. I don't know. But we did somehow. You know, that's with all the platforms because, you know, somebody might take it and it's kind of neat. They'll take your video, they'll share it, and it might get 30 million views. And another guy will share and get 25 million views. So before you know it, you've got over 1 billion views. And people know who you are, so it's a lot of fun
when it works like that. So
cut my wife in half or pull her head off and things like that. They know it. They know what I'm doing, so it's kind of neat.
Well, everybody, if you get a chance, all you have to do is Google Split Man or the name Andy Gross, and you'll see some of the amazing videos he's had on social media. Fred Anderson is also on the internet and can be found for gigs.
Yeah, YouTube, and my website is friscofred.com.
Friscofred.com. And Andy Gross, you have a website.
Andy Gross Live.
AndyGrossLive.com. Well, ladies and gentlemen, be sure to check out both these fine variety arts entertainers. They've both been a big part of my life in the industry and brought lots of joy to my audiences at Laughs Unlimited. Andy, Fred, thanks for joining me today.
Yeah, thank you, Scott, because, you know, you were a big part of helping the variety arts guys because, you know, sometimes when you're doing comedy clubs, not everyone likes the variety arts. You know, they look down upon it at times. You know, they want a straight stand-up comedy. So you were one of the guys that would bring us in, and we appreciate that. So thank you.
Yeah, no, I agree with that. Thank you very much.
My pleasure. Ladies and gentlemen, stay tuned next week. Another great show. Thanks for listening. Be sure to rate us and share us. Bye.
We hope you enjoyed this episode of Stand-Up Comedy, your host and MC. For information on the show, merchandise, and our sponsors, or to send comments to Scott, Visit our website at www.standupyourhostandmc.com. Look for more episodes soon and enjoy the world of stand-up comedy. Visit a comedy showroom near you.